Take it there? Who gon' take it there? Who gon' take it there? Who gon' take it there? Electricity, 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 electricity. You know what's in the air. 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 It's possibility. It's possibility. It's possibility. It's possibility.
So I want to talk about this guy, Dan Bongino, that Trump has appointed to be the deputy FBI director. So this is the guy who's going to be directly under Kash Patel, who was approved by the Senate to lead the FBI. And then you have Dan Bongino right underneath him, and that is not a Senate approved position. So he was just appointed by Trump, and there he is. And this guy is an interesting character because he has been in conservative media for a while. And this is not the first person that Trump has appointed to the cabinet who was in conservative media. You also have Pete Hegseth, who is now, doing one of the most important jobs in the administration, which is running the Pentagon. So Trump obviously just likes media personalities. And he seems to think that being a media personality who comments on things qualifies you to run a government agency. So we all know that that's going to go fantastically. And a lot of these guys are probably not going to be there for very long. But this Dan Bongino guy is he's raising my hackles a little bit. There's something in my brain that's going off about this guy. And so I'll give you a little bit of background on him, and I'll tell you why, and I'll give you some of my theories on the matter. But first, just to give you some context as to what type of commentary this guy does, here is a recent clip from his podcast where he is talking about the federal judges that have stopped some of what Trump is trying to do in terms of, shutting off all this money from the government, firing all these people. Obviously, conservatives are mad about that. Conservatives are mad that anybody can make any decision that contradicts Trump. So here's Dan Bongino showing that he doesn't really understand how checks and balances work.
Donald Trump's the executive. He says we have a problem in the executive branch. Hold on to these payments. The judge can't order these. He's just making it up. So here's my suggestion. If liberals are okay with judges making up constitutional powers, are they okay with Donald Trump fabricating executive powers? How about this? How about Donald Trump in the East Room of the White House sets up a courtroom, like remember the Batman movie? Scarecrow has the courtroom. What was it, the Bane one? It was at the Dark Knight or whatever. That's what we need to do. We need to set up a courtroom. Donald Trump can sit there. He can even wear like the wigs they wear in the UK court system, and he can just start making judicial decisions. He can't do that, bro. The judge can't do it either. What's the difference? If the judge is the executive, why can't the executive be the judge? Ask your stupid liberal friends.
So that clip is obviously frightening, and he seems rather unhinged. And what he's talking about is patently ridiculous. He's saying that Trump should set up kangaroo courts in the White House so that essentially they can make their own judicial decisions and bypass the courts. Which would be a completely ridiculous and absurd proposal if that wasn't something that dictatorships have done in the past. So, it's not an unrealistic scenario necessarily. The institutions of America would have to degrade significantly further for that to be plausible, but that degradation, it's definitely possible that could happen very rapidly. We'll have to see. Do I think that America's quite going to get to the point where we're having kangaroo courts in the White House? Probably not, but never say never. So my main point that I want to make about this Dan Bongino guy is not about this, what he says here in this clip, He's made lots of other commentary about the federal government and stuff like that. And what I really want to talk about is his history in working in the federal government. So the interesting thing about Dan Bongino is he is one of the only people that Trump has appointed who has any history of working in government at all. And he used to work for the Secret Service. Before that, he was an NYPD officer. Then he worked in the Secret Service. I believe he moved up a little bit in those ranks. He worked there for quite a few years. He eventually left the agency and then started writing books about it, about how broken the system is and all of this and the managerial class in government, etc. Similar things to what we hear from conservatives today. But the point is, this is a guy who was on the inside, and he has been talking this like anti-establishment conservative rhetoric for a long time, writing books about it, successful books, and doing media tours, podcasts, going on Fox News. And this guy, for some reason, has been pretty fucking prominent over the past few years. And not a lot of people outside of the conservative media bubble really know who this dude is. But through a very intense ad campaign and essentially like an influence campaign surrounding his podcast, he was consistently one of the top accounts on Facebook in terms of numbers, engagements, and partially that was because of ads and also just the network that he had built over across various platforms, including Rumble, which he is an investor in, and also Twitter, etc. So he has built in a pretty short amount of time this kind of personal media empire. At first I thought he was working with the Daily Wire because that's the exact same strategy that Ben Shapiro and the Daily Wire used to prop themselves up, is dumping millions of dollars into ads, into Facebook ads, because Meta or Facebook is an efficient enough and effective enough advertising vehicle that if you dump millions of dollars, if you have millions of dollars to spend on one ad campaign, like one specific product that you're trying to push to people, you can effectively push that to the top of many people's timelines and kind of place yourself in a central position in the public discourse. And this is what Dan Bongino has done. I mean, he went from being like some guy who worked for the Secret Service to being a guy who wrote books to all of a sudden he has like one of the most popular, quote unquote, popular podcasts in the country. He's going on Fox News. He took over Rush Limbaugh's slot when Rush Limbaugh died. I mean, think about that. Rush Limbaugh is like the conservative commentator. There's so many other guys who do the same thing that he did, and so many people who are scratching and clawing to have that spot that he had. And the person who gets it is Dan Bongino. Interesting. And I'll talk a little bit later about the commentary that this guy has done and what his sort of media career has been about and how that leads up to where we're at. But the real thing that is kind of bothering me about this guy is that there's something not right about the way that he has built this audience and the way that he has leveraged himself into power. So the fact that this guy used to be a Secret Service agent, right there, I mean, red flag, right? Huge red flag. So he leaves the Secret Service and he immediately starts writing popular books about the Secret Service and about the government. Huge red flag number 2. These books become popular. People are reading these books. These books are being amplified on platforms like Amazon and probably through Facebook ads as well. Red flag number 3. Then he becomes a commentator. He starts doing a podcast, and that podcast instantly achieves national notoriety and acclaim. I'm talking about like the top conservative podcast in the country by metrics on Facebook and a couple other places. Huge red flag, giant blinking red flag. Number 4. Red flags don't blink, but you take my point. Then he goes from being a political podcaster who talks publicly about the inner workings of agencies like the FBI and other agencies that he doesn't have experience in, but also the agency that he does have experience in, which is called the Secret Service. This guy is going on a podcast as a former employee of the Secret Service and talking publicly about how things work in the Secret Service. Red flag number 5. And then now this guy is appointed to Donald Trump's cabinet as deputy FBI director. And again, that is not a position that is subject to Senate confirmation. So that's 6 huge red flags by my count. And I'm sure some of you can identify some more, so feel free to list those in the comments. But to me, that trajectory, not only is it extremely suspect, but I think it's very telling. It's very telling in terms of how conservative media works, and also how this sort of like deep state rot that these conservatives are so worried about, supposedly, including this Dan Bongino guy. I think that his career is an exact illustration of how that sort of government subterfuge actually takes place, right? So I'm a layman, so everything that I'm going to say about this is from a layman's perspective. Okay, I'm not an insider, all right? But I have a working brain, okay? So I'm just going to go through this step by step, the way I see it, and like let's see if we can make some sense out of how this guy got to where he's at. So you start working in the Secret Service. He was a cop before that, ends up in the Secret Service. That's not totally outlandish. He worked directly with George W. Bush and Obama, protecting them. And he did that for several years. And then he said that the sort of managerial class that supersedes the Secret Service and the incentives of the various parts of the executive branch, including the Secret Service and the FBI and CIA, that they were politically motivated. These were the kind of things that he was complaining about as he left the Secret Service. Now, right there, to me, is where the questions start arising in my head. Because in what world is someone able to leave the Secret Service and then start talking publicly about what it was like to work for them? I mean, that just doesn't really pass the smell test. And so if you take that logic a step further, the only way that he would be able to do that is if it was sanctioned in some way. In other words, him saying these things that he's saying about the Secret Service and other agencies was part of a script, so to speak. I'm not saying that everything this guy has done or said is scripted, but what I'm saying is that when you're in an agency like the Secret Service or the CIA, you're not just like done. You don't just like put your 2 weeks notice in and you're done. And a lot of people throughout the world, internationally, who have worked for the CIA and different agencies like that, are still affiliated. And they have connections from those agencies that they still correspond with. And when it comes time to make media appearances or pull off little stunts that pushes the public narrative in a certain direction, a lot of these guys are on call to do that. And that's not necessarily the case with the Secret Service. More so like the CIA. I mean, CIA, FBI, these guys are spies. So once they leave the agency, unless it's like on really bad terms, chances are that skill set that they have as spies is going to be put to use somehow, even if it's down the line in the future. Having an extensive roster of former agents that can be asked or leveraged or potentially blackmailed into making particular moves, making particular statements, and that sort of thing. I mean, this is the kind of soft power that government agencies have. And just follow me here, okay? I'm getting a little galaxy brained on this one, but we're going to take it all the way, all right? So Dan Bongino leaves the federal government. He's now in the public sector, and he's writing about the federal government. And he's writing about reforms that he thinks need to happen and how the entire leadership of these agencies needs to be overhauled, things like that. Then Trump rises to prominence, and Dan Bongino is pretty much on his side from the beginning. Just like most of the people, or really all of the people that Trump is appointing, this guy is somebody who has consistently demonstrated loyalty. Okay, that's important. And then as Trump's first term progressed, he becomes an even more diehard Trump loyalist, talking about the deep state, talking about how the deep state's trying to take Trump out, etc., etc. So not just a diehard Trumper, but somebody who's really pushing the pro-Trump narratives against the deep state and the government, which is what he comes from. Whether or not he's like some kind of rogue agent or whatever he claims to be, he still comes from that world. And the credibility that he claims is because of that. So now he's a diehard Trumper. He's arguing for Trump pretty much the years after Trump's first term. So from COVID on is when he really gained prominence. He faced some reprimands from one of the platforms he was on, probably Facebook, over COVID misinformation. And because of that, he pivoted to Rumble and that sort of thing. And so this eventually leads to him being prominent enough that I guess Trump or Trump's people were aware of him and decided that he would be a perfect fit for the cabinet. And again, him being placed right underneath Kash Patel is interesting. Kash Patel is one of these Project 2025 guys. I don't think he was one of the authors of it because I don't think he was smart enough to do that. Kash Patel does not seem like a very smart guy to me. But he's in that orbit. He was one of these people that was known to be a Trump loyalist, and essentially that they viewed as somebody that could be like an attack dog, somebody that would be ruthless in his leadership of the FBI. And then you have Dan Bongino right underneath him in a non-Senate approved position. Interesting. So here's my theory, okay? I think that this guy is a plant, and that his job was always to end up in the position that he is in now. And that's not to say that this was all planned. It was all, everybody knew that exactly this was going to happen. But what I'm saying is that the erosion of trust in the government and the acceleration of this idea of fully dismantling the government is part of a years-long psyop that Dan Bongino participated in. And so we're talking about years and years and years and millions of dollars of propaganda that's going into propping up the narrative that the government is hurting you, the government is wasting your money, the FBI is after you, the CIA is after Trump, whatever it is. I'm talking 8 years of consistent propaganda to this effect. And Dan Bongino was a consistent proponent of that propaganda. And he was somebody who came from within that world. So this right-wing coup that we are seeing happening in America is actually pretty comparable to right-wing coups that America has sponsored in other countries through programs like US aid and other means of giving resources to certain hand-picked political parties in various countries that were selected by US intelligence as the best way to subvert actual populist and socialist movements in various countries. Countries like Guatemala, Chile, Argentina, Iran. This is what, in large part, the so-called deep state has been up to all these years. So Trump, and all the conservatives talking about the deep state, what they're really talking about is a network of people within the intelligence community and probably some other agencies that operate internationally to an extent that they don't necessarily feel like they answer to the president. Or if they do, it is only a matter of convenience because the nature of their jobs is not subject to the 4-year turnover of presidential administrations. So that's essentially the claim of the deep state. And conservatives will have you believe that this deep state is orchestrating all kinds of propaganda in your personal life. It's going after you personally. They're going after conservatives. They're debanking them, etc. That's all nonsense. What the government is really doing in those deep bowels, and not all aspects or agencies of the government operate that way. In fact, I would say most of them are relatively normal. They're doing oversight of corporations and that sort of thing. But you do have these intelligence agencies that have an enormous amount of power because what they've been tasked with over the years is creating networks in various countries and in various parts of US media, etc., that they can use to their advantage, that they can leverage in certain ways. They use this to kill stories. They use this to create political unrest and uprising, to spread political narratives, propaganda, rumors, that sort of thing. And so, first of all, I want to say the idea that Trump is going to do away with that is nonsense. First of all, it benefits him, just like it benefits any U.S. president. Trump has now been elected twice. If these people wanted to stop Trump from being elected, it would have happened. And so what I'm saying is that the right-wing coup that we're seeing happening in America is not dissimilar to right-wing coups that have happened in other countries. And I don't think that what we're seeing is that so-called deep state cooing our current government in favor of putting Donald Trump in power. I think that's a little bit overly simplistic. But I think at very least, the U.S. government's pretty tried and true tactics are being used against it by somebody. And you could also say that the deep state, so to speak, was well aware that this was coming and had plenty of time to prepare and plenty of time to create contingency plans if there were ever a situation where a president like Donald Trump came into power and wanted to completely dismantle these agencies, etc. And I mean, Project 2025, it's all written right there. It's in black and white. And that information was available for at least a couple years before Donald Trump won. So if you think that these intelligence agencies weren't well aware of that and planning for it, then you're not really aware of how intelligence agencies work. And so what I'm claiming is that this Dan Bongino guy is the type of figure that they put out there because he's useful in exactly this type of situation, right? So you have a guy who used to work at these agencies. He's got some credibility. He's got a way of speaking that is relatable to a certain portion of Americans. And so he's out there, he's popping off at the mouth. He's spreading these same right-wing narratives that Americans have spread in other countries and used to destabilize their nation. And you have this guy here spouting off at the mouth. He's not the only one. There's plenty of these conservatives. There's not that many that come directly from federal law enforcement and intelligence. And so I think that once the utility of having a guy like this in media, propped up by millions of dollars of ad money on Meta, investments in platforms like Rumble, etc., is that when this coup happens, when these right-wingers come into power who want to dismantle the government, there's somebody who they trust and they view as being on their side in wanting to dismantle the government, who actually comes from the government. And he was there before. So to their eyes, he has insider knowledge. But to my eyes, he probably has a set of incentives that are different from what the rest of Trump world's incentives are. And so the question to me is, if it's true that this guy is some kind of like propped up media figure, what is the purpose of having a right-wing propagandist of his nature be appointed to the Trump administration, right? Like, what's the point of propping up a figure who constantly says that the FBI needs to be overhauled, that the intelligence agencies are corrupted and compromised, and that the Secret Service is, whatever, completely defanged by DEI or whatever the fuck? What's the purpose of that, right? Because it seems like if you think about it in a straightforward way, what it makes sense for the intelligence community to prop up would be people who are propping up the intelligence community, right? If you think in a straightforward propaganda type of logic, that's what makes the most sense. Except these guys know, these spies, they know that in order to infiltrate a movement, in order to infiltrate anything, you have to be believable. And certainly if you're infiltrating a radical movement, you got to talk that radical talk, baby. You can't hold back. You have to say all the right things, and people have to believe that you are bloodthirsty. And so that's what I see from Dan Bongino. And the fact that he now is all of a sudden in the Trump administration in spectacular fashion, to me, that just seems a little bit too perfect. And so we'll see what happens. I think the real thing to look out for here is if Dan Bongino ends up replacing Kash Patel, which I think there's a high likelihood that could happen. Mainly because Kash Patel seems to be an idiot. He seems like certifiably insane. And so I don't know what the chances of him lasting in that position. I don't know if he's even like actually capable of doing that job. Like, not just like, oh, he doesn't do it up to a certain standard, or, liberals don't like the way he's doing it or whatever. But like, he literally might just not be able to do it. He might be literally incapable. And so if a switcheroo happens and Dan Bongino ends up running the FBI, not only will that be a subversion of Congress, they put somebody in place who doesn't have to be approved by the Senate. I'm not sure exactly what the procedure would be at that point. But I mean, it's the Trump administration, so who cares? It's the Wild West. But Dan Bongino ending up back as the head of the FBI would essentially mean that, for lack of a better way to put this, the deep state has retained control of the agencies which Trump is trying to subvert control of. And there's questions here. There's questions about how much Donald Trump actually wants to subvert the deep state, because especially if, agencies like the CIA or whatever are well versed in right-wing coups like the one we're seeing happen right now, wouldn't that imply that they're kind of on the same side? I think that Donald Trump hates the CIA and the FBI because both of them were investigating him for a long time and knew that he was sort of a mouthpiece and a useful tool for various foreign interests. And he still is that, by the way. And I think that the so-called deep state, I apologize for continuing to use that phrase, but it's the quickest way to articulate what I'm talking about here. The best thing for them to do in a scenario where Trump not only takes power, but then takes power again, is to plant somebody in that influence network who then can end up in a position to take back some of the power that Trump is trying to take away from federal agencies like the FBI and the CIA. And also keep in mind that the FBI and the CIA are parts of the executive branch. So even if Donald Trump, wants to dismantle them or do whatever crazy shit he thinks he wants to do, the executive branch having essentially infinite power, the CIA, the FBI, they benefit from that. And any deep state cohort that exists within the CIA benefits from the executive branch being all powerful. So if this destabilization of the federal government occurs, which it is, and we had documented plans of exactly what we're seeing now for at least a couple years. So that destabilization occurs, but then somebody is put in place who can maintain a semblance of control over the departments that Donald Trump has destabilized. Then ultimately those agencies are able to benefit from the increased power of the executive branch and the whatever increased mobility they have from the removal of guardrails that Trump and Elon Musk and Kash Patel and whoever else are now engaging in. So it's just my theory, it's just my galaxy brain theory. We all know that I'm always right about everything, especially when I'm speculating wildly about government agencies that I've never been a part of. But I don't know. Tell me what you guys think. I think there's something fishy here. This guy, Dan Bongino, all these other fucking lunatics that have come out of nowhere, I'm sure some of them are sketchy in other ways that I'm not considering. But this is the first guy where I'm like, this guy's background indicates something weird is going on. But I think the most important lesson that we can learn from this is that you can successfully infiltrate the federal government as a podcaster by simply propping up your podcast with millions of dollars in ad money. So I'm just putting that out there to all of you guys. If there is potentially, a certain floating cartoon head that you would like to see have totally unchecked power and control over federal agencies, all it's going to take is for you dumping a few $1 million into promoting this podcast. Just some food for thought. If you like this podcast, please like and subscribe and comment. And if you really want to support the channel, consider becoming a member. That's the best way to support me. I'm going to be posting all kinds of exclusive content there, exclusive podcasts, songs, beats. If you like the beats that play in the back of these podcasts, all of those are posted there. Plus more. If there's exclusive content that you'd like to see, ideas you have, let me know and we'll work some things out.